Is this in Zander?
Rosh Hashiva Shlit.
Hashem. And I hope tonight we'll hear some stories also. I'm sure we will. But I'd like to explain something about who he was. I want you to know my relationship to him. Obviously, we were brothers. But you can be an older brother or a big brother. He was not my older brother. With him, you have fights. He was my big brother. I didn't have any fights with him. His claw, what he told me, and so on. And I'm listening to, doing the Shiva, and even doing the Hespedim today. What impressed the people? And the thing that struck me is, I don't understand. We were all endowed with 3 genetic midas. And the question is, he was a bigger Gemol Chassid. Okay, he picked it up. He had more work done to Milas Chasodim. Or there, maybe another thing. Maybe he had nothing to spoil it. The reason we aren't the Baishonim that we should be is because the world spoiled it for us. Or the Rachmonim, or the Gemol Chasodim. And I'd like to explain that a little bit. Because obviously we're all trained to be the nice guy, and it's in our blood. So how do we change? So one of the things that I guess that born on the east side, or brought up on the east side, he wasn't born there, but he was in the house of the Rosh Hashivas, that's how. The concept of Gaiva didn't exist. What do you mean? Where does Gaiva come from? Gaiva comes from Kineh. I gotta show you who I am. I don't want to be the low guy on the pole, so I'm gonna try and beat you. One man that the east side had was nobody had anything more than anybody else. What do you mean, the world's equally poor? I don't mean that. What was in the bank, nobody knew. But we did know you had 3 bedrooms, or 2 bedrooms, or 1 bedroom, that we knew. And usually it went according to how many kids you got. That's how you worked for it. And you had to wait for them. There weren't that many. And the first, and you'll have an old man having the 3 bedrooms, and you'll have a rich guy having only 1 bedroom. I mean, that one thing had nothing to do with the other. It wasn't totally in the money, it wasn't totally in anything else. It was simply, we all got along. We weren't mekana anybody, because there was nothing to be mekana. Probably, I'll tell you the truth, if we went in and saw an antique in somebody's house, we think what an old couch that is, instead of being appreciating the value of an antique. And that made you weren't spoiled. You made the same honor as you were before. And that's part of Baishonis. Baishonis is, I'm embarrassed to show myself above anybody else. And if I don't think it's company, I surely won't show myself. So therefore, Nov is a chelik of Baishonis. The Gemol Chesed, as we said, Rachman. So they talked about his Hespedim, and that's true, that was there. But again, the Rosh Hashiva was there in the house too, so you learned a little bit from him. I mean, what did we learn in a Moshe? You know, if you say the Rosh Hashiva had certain kishronis that none of us are able to have, so I'm not in competition with him. So I might as well retire now. Why should I waste my time trying to learn and become thing? I'm never going to become as big as him anyway. So what's the point? And with us, he held that the Gedolei Yisrael are normal people. That's the way he touches up the posuk in Mitzvahim, at the Mitzvah Mayim, al Rasheichem Shiftechem. So Rashi gets Rasheichem Li Shiftechem, the Sot Alamed. He used to touch up Rasheichem is Shiftechem. In other words, they come from the Shvatim. They're the regular people. They come out and they develop. Now, how do they develop? Now, we'll talk about things of memory. You say, well, what's going to do with this guy? Some people have photographic memories. What am I? I have no shaykhs to that. Okay. Is there anything that you remember from your youth? Think about it. When you're 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old. I'm not particular what age you're starting yet, but I'm sure you remember some stories, something that was told in kindergarten, or stories that were told in the stories when the Rebbeim were trying to teach you about the others and stuff like that, and the Russian. Why do you remember that and don't remember anything else? Because that obviously had it made a relation on you. The reason was why. Could be I was enthused at that time, could be the Rebbe had a good way of presenting it, whatever it is, there's different reasons why a person would become enthused. So really the question is not the memory that we have to develop among Tabachim. It's really the enthusiasm or the rotzen or whatever word you want to call it, the chshivus probably, hatera, and Memela, we all know it. It's spelling into the chshivus hatera. If you would have that chshivus as we had for the story, then there wouldn't be any question what you remember. You remember it all. One time. What do you need more times for? For Chazorah, for Iyun, for a lot of things that you need in there. But the basic thing you know before. So to develop with his Hasmodeh and his Yediyas and stuff, that, okay, Baruch Hashem, he had the Chshivas HaTorah, and he worked on it. And he had choices, and he made his choices. Same Batola that they had now, whatever it is there. There's Batola around it. And he even participated in some of it. Not one say it's called Batola, and we always call it here exercise, we call it other things. And he had a basketball team. He was a good second baseman in punchball, if you guys know what punchball is. And what does that got to do with learning? You're right, it had nothing to do with learning. But he chose learning. I remember once the Rosh Hashiva, my wife was teaching my Yeniko how to play chess. And the Rosh Hashiva saw them doing it. So he asked what they were doing, because they played chess. Because I also played chess once. Until I discovered that it takes a lot of, mayach. You have to concentrate a lot, you have to, what do you call it? And it takes too much away from learning. So therefore he gave it up. My wife had the chutzpah to ask how old you were at that time. He said 8. But the idea is, it comes into you, it's a choice. You made a choice. It wasn't just like, I came in, it was easy for me. It's not easy. What do you call it, about a shtike? It was also a choice. One mile I saw in the, one thing is, you'll say, well, he just said, he was called up, and I was in the room sometimes when he was called up to speak. No one ever asks, but they call you up to speak anyway. And he just sat there. He wouldn't move. Then they called me up to speak. And I was embarrassed to sit there, so I went up to speak, even though I had nothing to say. So it's a point that is a keches hanefesh, that I'm not swayed by your opinion. In other words, maybe because what happened in Russia, that whatever it is, they were always trying to get the kids to be communists and so on, and muscle on the parents, or whatever it is, and he probably didn't give in, because my mother used to tell me all the stories about him and Misha, and Ivan, the father of Misha's father Ivan, all kinds of crazy stories she used to tell me. Whether they were true or not, I have no idea, but it worked for eating. But obviously there was a Misha and there was a Ivan, and they were Seni Yisrael, a peasant type of Seni Yisrael, not a point of the Hespedim or whatever it is, the peasant type. And he knew that he can't give in to what other people hold as important. It's the only way he's going to stand by himself. And the easiest way of not doing this is not to get into arguments with anybody, not to get into discussions with anybody. I'm not talking to you. Not because I want to talk to you. I smile on you very nicely, but I don't answer you. And that was his shtick. His shtick was in a way laichlessly. I don't care what you have to say. I'm not swayed by it. And that keches hanefesh was very important and developed him, I think, into becoming who he was. Of course, learning, he learned. He understood Shivas HaTevi, he understood Kinyan HaKech HaPsak, not to just rumble, come out with a clear psak for the people they can follow. You want to talk over the Union, you can talk over the Union, but I don't have to make it palatable for you. In other words, you would say, sometimes you tell somebody, and it's also, and the person says, well, maybe you can give me some, because that's the halacha. You don't have to give me more than that. That's the halacha. You want to really talk and learning? We'll talk and learning. It has nothing to do with the halacha. That's the part that he was. This week, Saturday, she says, Yitzchak was Yitzchak when Avram heard this Yitzchak. The reason it said that, because people always were saying that it was Avimelech's son. So therefore he looked exactly like Avram. So it's Avram heard this Yitzchak. I think the same thing can be said about him. He was talking about David ben Moshe, and that's his Torahs, but it's Moshe heard his David. In other words, whatever he did, he followed in that path what his father did. It's big, not as big, it's not negaya. He definitely served the purpose. He helped a lot of people. Helped people decide. He gave aids to people. He gave brachas to people. He helped people. That was the ego that he had to do. And in Mela, he was able to be who he was and proud of it, and he remained the same. He's a chedbach.
Rav Moskowitz, Mechaber Sefer V'Dibar Tabom, Zera Non Talmud.
Rishus the Rosh Yeshiva Shlita and Analysis Yeshiva Shlita. I could say that after hearing the words of the Rosh Yeshiva Shlita, it's very hard to follow with what I'm about to tell you. A lot of B'nai Torah around the world have asked me to try to give over whatever I could give from my perspective. And many of them, I said to them, listen, I'm not a bar hachi to be able to say what I understand about the Rosh Yeshiva, that's magdir the Rosh Yeshiva in any way. But I saw that there's a very interesting marsha in Masechet Shabbos, Daf Kuf Hey Amud Beis. The Gemara there says that if anyone is morid demois, al adam kasher is moichlin al kol avanosav. To understand, to be makir, what it means that we had this adam kasher in the world, and now it's gone, and that's a tremendous chus for Klal Yisrael. And the Marsha says even more, that if it's a Talmud, this is only by an Adam Kasher, but if it's a Talmud Chacham, if it's someone who's learned Torah, then there's a chiyuv to be morid demois on the Torah that was lost to the door. Not just for that Gavra. It's even beyond the Gavra. It's beyond that individual. It's a chiyuv on the door. So therefore, I'm going to try to give my perspective to prepare some inyanim that I think are very nogeya, and I'll share with you my experiences that I could say. But again, I'm humbled speaking at this makom of such a makom of which B'nai Torah and throughout all these decades of avoda and Torah and all the Talmidah and Talmidei Chachamim. It's a humbling experience, but at the same time, I'll try to give over what might inspire us, because that's the purpose of the Hesped in the first place. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, Samach Ches Amud Aleph. The Gemara says that Rabbi Akiva was maspid Rabbi Eliezer, and he quoted the pasuk, Avi Avi Rechav Yisrael Ufarshav. This is the pasuk that Elisha said on Eliyahu Hanavi when he went to Shemayim. And the Marsha says he was maspid, the great koyach that was lost for Klal Yisrael. The magen of Klal Yisrael, the chariot of Klal Yisrael was lost. That was the koyach of Tefillah. Rabbi Akiva was maspid, was makir, and was mishabeach the Torah. The Torah of Rabbi Eliezer was magen. And what was so great about it, the Gemara gives a mashal, that he said, Harbe ma'os yeshli, v'shulchani Ainli lahartzoisan. And the Marsha explains what he meant was that the coins, sometimes you need bikiyas to know if in those days the coin was worth half the value, if it had to be thrown out, the full value. You could have most, but you don't know how much it's worth. And the Marsha says this b'dafka was that Rabbi Eliezer had that kayach to be shoikel sveikos uposhet she'elos. He had the koyach to understand which Torah was right, which Torah was wrong, which was you could rely on, which you couldn't rely on. That was what was lost. That Torah was so great that it was mugging on the door. And from my experience, again, which is all I could tell you, is that I saw in the last 26 years of sitting by the Rosh Yeshiva, I saw such amazing things in Torah, in Avodah, in so many things, which I'll try to give over the ma'at that I could talk about. I came to the Rosh Yeshiva was already 65. The Rosh Yeshiva was already considered a gadol in the door. I know that Rav Yashiv wrote in a letter that he was the Per Hador, and I found even more. I found in the Dibros, which the Rosh Yeshiva told me was the Iker Torah in Halacha from his father, Zchon Aracha, more than the Igros. which I'm sure you know, but there's a very interesting ha'ara in Dibros in Gittin, Maseches Gittin, Daf Gimel, where the Dibros brings a raya in the sugya from a certain achron, and I was reading it. First, I found on Daf Beis that there was a pshat in the name of the Rashiva, but then on Daf Gimel there is an amazing pshat. He brings a pshat in the Gemara there. And at the end of the paragraph brings a raya from a certain sefer. I wanted to see more clearly who that sefer was. And then I saw V'gam B'ni, and he mentioned the Rashiva, Dikdek L'faresh Ke'ein Zeh. In other words, the Dibros was bringing a raya that he was right in the sugya, the Havanas Ha'inyan, from what our Rosh Hashiva said. It's an amazing thing. If you understand what that means, and from the perspective of, again, it's hard to speak here because everyone knows much more, but I'm just telling you my perspective, that I found a tshuva in Chelik Yeredeya, Chelik Dalet of Igros Moshe, in Simon Lamed Vav. And he writes there a very interesting tshuva. It was written in Tafshin Mem Beis. I actually know the person it was written to. It's a Ksav Yad. And in that tshuva, the Igros explains a murdika chiyuv of Talmud Torah, that there's shnei dinim nefradim. There's a din in learning kol hatarakula b'kiyas, and then he writes that there's a chiyuv on Klal Yisrael to have Gedolei Yisrael, and he says that it's a chiyuv on that they should be gedolim in the chachma lios chacham. He says chachamim mamish. B'Torah v'leida gam laharos, and this is in Klal Yisrael. And then he goes b'chol dar v'dar, that they should have the gedolim that know kol haTorah kula. He writes this point, and he says certainly it means laharos in the Torah. Lo rak b'dvarim hanoegim b'zman hazeh, ela af b'kodshim af l'taras. Achiv HaKoidem hu lidvarim hanogim b'zman hazeh. Kimo, and he writes, Kimo the Gedolim of our time. Tafshin Mem Beis. How many Gedolim were there that could be Moira Hara in Kodshim and Tyrus? L'maisa, I can just tell you from what I saw. Baruch Hashem, when I came to the Rosh Hashiva 27 years ago, but the Rosh Hashiva told me that he wants to speak in learning. He's going to speak in learning with me, but he wants me to prepare all the sugya beforehand, so that I only prepare and say over the sugya, and the Rosh Hashiva will give me his hachra and guidance and whatever it is. I used to prepare the whole sugya with many times spending weeks, sometimes months on a sugya with all the rishonim, achronim, everything. Every time I spoke to the Rosh Hashiva, which was an amazing thing, I used to speak over the Torah and the preparation. I used to speak to different Gedolim, many Talmidei Chachamim. And what was amazing was that the Rosh Hashiva was holding in everything that I presented. I would talk very, very quickly, and I was very clear because I prepared very, very much before I would speak to Rosh Hashiva. And every single step, the Rosh Hashiva was holding and asking. Many times Rosh Hashiva would ask a kasha, and I would find the kasha in the Chassam Sofer, or find the teretz in Rebbe Kiva Eger. Everything, it was amazing. And again, this is my perspective. I'm only telling what I was zocheh to see, an amazing thing. I used to watch the Rosh Hashiva Chazer Shas. I couldn't figure out how many times he was chazering it. I couldn't figure it out. Every day was a different Masechta. One week it was Rosh Hashanah, one week Chulin. Next week Shabbos, I couldn't figure out how much. So I realized that it was just that his entire Torah was in front of him at all times. And it wasn't just a Bikiyas, it was a tremendous Amkus. I saw the Ha'aris, Rosh Hashiva used to write every morning. I would come early in the morning, I would read the Ha'aris on the Masechtas. They were Me'ain the Marmshif, Me'ain the Marsha, Mamish, Diyukim, and Rashis, and on every single blot in Shas. It was a moiridika thing. On any part of Torah. Whether it was Chumash, whether it was Navi, whether it was medrash, anything. It was just amazing to see. And again, this is the ma'at that I saw. I saw with my own eyes. And so you have to stop for a second. How is it that someone like this is so great? And we know the Gemara, like we mentioned, the Gemara in Megillah Davav, to be oikim agirsa, to Rashi says, shelo tishkach terasai. You need siyata d'shmaya. What was it? How did the Rosh Hashiva get this tremendous siyata d'shmaya that he managed to seemingly fool the world into thinking that he was just a Pashut Yid, when every single sugya, you got to remember, I spent years and years and years, thousands of sugyas. I never saw the Rosh Hashiva. I would speak 20 mar makaymas in a matter of 10 or 15 minutes. The Rosh Hashiva never asked me to repeat any mar makom. Anything I said, the Rosh Hashiva was with me, and further with all the rayas from Shas and Poskim. It was an amazing thing on every sugya, and it wasn't just things that were nogei l'maisa. It was in Kodshim and Taras. The Rosh Hashiva we had a seder in Mishnayos right after davening. Pashut is seder. When I first came, I wasn't really machshiv it that much, but the Rosh Hashiva taught me to be machshiv every single Mishnah. Every single Mishnah in Kodshim and Taras and everything. I would bring in Chazon Ish, I would bring in Mishnah Achroina. Many times I would come back 6 months later with a kasha, with the teretz. Rosh Hashiva was always holding in everything much, much more than I could see, much, much more than I realized. And I heard a tape from the Rosh Hashiva's father Zatzal in Tafshin Lamed Gimel, where he says that the chiyuv of a ben Torah is that every yachid, he used this lashon, that every single yachid should reach his cheluk of Torah ad sheyado magas. And that seems to be what the Rosh Hashiva had reached, that madrega of tfisa of Torah, and with such a siyata d'shmaya, with such a hakara of every word of Torah. The Rosh Hashiva appreciated the iyunim on if it would be a lashon of Tosfos, a lashon of Rashi, a chiddush, a teretz. It was such a simcha when the Rosh Hashiva would hear it, and when the Rosh Hashiva would give the teretz or to listen to somebody else's teretz. It was the same simcha. There was nothing about the Rosh Hashiva's own self. So where is the siyata d'shmaya that how could the Rosh Hashiva have this, that everyone in the world came to the Rosh Hashiva and was makir him as our gadol of our time? So everyone's been saying the same thing, and I just want to add my own point that I saw myself. There's a very interesting Gemara. The Gemara says in Mesachas Chulin Peites Samad Aleph that the olam is miskayem on someone that is boilam piv b'shas meriva, someone that's able to keep quiet during an argument. The world is miskayem on that person, on such a person. And then the Gemara says, Reb Yehoshua says further, not just that. It's got to be more than that. It's miskayem on someone who's nase kemisha einai, that he doesn't exist. The dresses and so on, the lashon rishonim there. So I saw a murdik vart from the Ruach Chaim, Rav Chaim Volozhiner, in Parak Dalet of Avos in the first Mishnah. He says like this. He writes that the Iker Anav, the Iker definition of Anav is, he says that a person is, he's loy ma'uma, he's not yispoil mehakavod afilu kechut hasayra. He's not affected even in any way, even kechut hasayra of kavod. Meaning to say that you could keep quiet, you're bolam piv, but that's not really the end of the game. You have to be in your mind. It's absolutely no effect whatsoever. Biz Yonos kavod, it's the same. And I actually saw this many, many times. There were many times when I saw the Rosh Hashiva when there was so much kavod given to him. The Rosh Hashiva used to always tell me the Rashi in Parsha Shmini that says by Moshe Rabbeinu that it's lo bosh lahoidos loimer lo shamati, that even a Moshe Rabbeinu It was a chiddush that he could say lo shamati, and the Rosh Yeshiva would point out that you see from here that it's not so pashut. If the Torah is madgish this point, it means it's a certain yetzirah that a person has. The Rosh Yeshiva never got involved in psak halacha. It was never a personal psak. It was never about himself. He didn't care at all. The Rosh Yeshiva did not care if somebody else followed his psak or not. So they followed someone else. It wasn't a personal thing. It was Torah which was nothing to do with himself. It was this idea, this madrega, that there was no kavod, there was no bizayin. And I'll explain. I saw a murdik a maisa which I'll never forget. And I've said it over, but I'm going to say it here, l'kavod the yeshiva. I was in the kolel office, and behind the mechitza, I was looking up some svarim, and I didn't know that the Rosh Yeshiva was going to come in. It's very makeshift over there at that time. And somebody came in and started talking to the Rosh Yeshiva about a personal issue, about a certain problem that they had. And Rosh Yeshiva gave him an eitzah, and all of a sudden, I heard that I was behind the mechitza, I was looking up a sefer, and I heard this individual start getting very, very angry and started to personally insult the Rosh Yeshiva very much, to the point that I can tell you these words, that I never saw anyone get such busha, such mavaza someone else in such a way in my entire life. And I could not believe it. And I was thinking to myself, maybe I should come out and say, sorry, you have to leave. This is not the way you treat the Rosh Yeshiva. But I realized I can't do anything. If the Rosh Yeshiva accepts it, I should say, just keep quiet. And I was going to learn with the Rosh Yeshiva in another 5 minutes. So what happened was the guy kept going with all the insults. Unbelievable, with chachma, with everything, not just stam. He was getting into really, really being mavaz the Rosh Yeshiva. The Rosh Yeshiva said absolutely nothing. He looked at the guy, he continued just letting him talk. The Rosh Yeshiva said nothing. I came out, I sat down to learn. The Rosh Yeshiva said nothing, no defense, nothing about what happened, nothing, absolutely nothing. So I realized that it doesn't make any difference to the Rosh Yeshiva, and I saw this not once, many, many times. Kavod, bizayin, it was all the same. But where does that come from? And that we heard already this idea, but I'll just add this point. The way I understood it was that the Rosh Yeshiva was saying, and he was machazik people all the time with this idea, and that's how I know that this is the Hesber. Rosh Yeshiva used to tell people, if you have a nisayon in life, you have to know that the Borei Olam is giving you that nisayon. The Borei Olam will not give you a nisayon that you can't handle. If you have that nisayon, it means that you can handle it. Rosh Yeshiva had such emunah, such bitachon in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He knew that this doesn't make any difference. Kavod, bizyonos, there's no difference at all. It's all the same. It's all part of what the Borei Olam is doing. Rosh Yeshiva told me ad kedei kach. I heard this pshat 25 years ago. The Rosh Yeshiva said a moiridik pshat. I asked the Rosh Yeshiva, why is there a minhag before passing away, before a person's nifter, they say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. So Rosh Yeshiva said, I don't really know, but I'll tell you why. Because we should say that we don't have any tainas to Hashem for our life. Moiridik. That means that the Rosh Yeshiva was saying that no matter what happens in your life, whatever challenges, whatever difficulties you have, you realize that the Borei Olam is with you in every step, in every way, in every situation. That's what the Rosh Yeshiva said. That's an amazing thing. That's why he had the koach to do this. And people would ask me, how could the Rosh Yeshiva be zoicha that all these people from all over the world came to him for questions? I mean, there were a lot of people that knew halacha. Why did the Rosh Yeshiva get that? So I told him, listen, I don't understand your kasha. It's a beferish pasuk in Mishlei. Doesn't it say the pasuk v'lanovim yitein chen? And the Bira Gra writes on that pasuk that if a person is shomeas, is in the lovim ve'ina ovim shomeach or pasim ve'ina meshivim, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him this koach to find chen. It says mefurish. It says in Tzoyta Daf Hey, they bring the pasuk, V'esdaka, Ushval Ruach. Rashi says that Hashem is marchin the Shechina on that person. The person is with Hashem. He's always with the Bari Olam. He has such emunah, such bitachon. Nothing could touch that person. The person is besimcha. He lives, whether it's bizoyan, whether it's kavod, it's all the same. A lot of people say that the Rosh Hashiva and Gedolim, they're beyond us. How could we learn from them? They have no shaykhs to us. The Rosh Hashiva totally did not accept that at all, at least for us. In fact, I once asked the Rosh Hashiva about this idea of Hespedim. We were learning Hilchos Avelos. The Rosh Hashiva said, Avada, the whole point of the Hesped is that everyone here, everyone who hears my voice, everyone who understands what I'm saying, and I mean, it means everyone, can learn from this high Gavarav, this great tzaddik and gadol that was in our midst. Can we find anybody like that is learning totally lishma and knows kol haTorah kula with all the nafkaminas and halacha from Shas and Poskim? How can we? And is it learning totally l'shem shamayim for without any personal interest whatsoever? How could there be a person like that? The answer is, it could be, because it could be you. You could, maybe you won't get to the madrega of being a gadol ador, but who cares? Every mishnah, every brisa, every pasuk, anything you learn is a simcha. It's your chelik in Torah. You're learning, and you're doing it lishma, and you're doing it without any hope of getting any kavod. And like we heard from the Rosh Hashiva Shlit here, that obviously, and I understand that this is not something that the Rosh Hashiva got himself. Think about it. Soviet Union, when the Rosh Hashiva Zatzal was in the attic learning Zroyim, and never had any havamin of anybody asking him any kind of question, because you couldn't even talk to the Rav. If you did, you'd get sent to Siberia. So who exactly was Rosh Hashiva Zatzal learning for? The answer is, it's Torah. It doesn't make a difference. If no one ever asks you a question, it's your chelik in Torah. This is the lesson that you have to understand. The Rosh Hashiva I saw was so chashuv in that way, that gave me such chizik to understand that every single mishnah is chashuv. Every single mishnah, to the point that we used to learn after davening every mishnah. We went through Shas many times, like several times. I remember this last kufa was very, very difficult because of Corona and so on. We were home. I didn't even see the Rosh Hashiva from Purim till before Shavuos. And I saw the Rosh Hashiva, and it wasn't that easy, but he came into the yeshiva one day, and I was holding my Mishnayos, and I said, I kept up the Seder we were holding in Maseches Para. The Rosh Hashiva smiled, and he said, so did I. He was so happy, he was so besimcha that he kept up that Seder. It wasn't an easy thing. He had Corona, it was not pashut. Rabbosai, this is what everyone can learn. We can all learn from this. If we do that, then we fill the void. That's what the Rosh Hashiva taught me, was the idea of the Hesped. We can all become better. We can all learn more lishma, not for any other purpose than to know the Torah as well as you can. Ad sheyadam agas. What's wrong with that? Why can't you do that? You can't learn from that? Why not? Instead of talking about how many times somebody chazered Shas, and how many times they chazered Yerushalmi, and how many times they chazered Tanakh, and how many times everything else that I would mention, that's not important. What's important is you learning from them, becoming the Ben Torah you can become, reaching your kayach and your chelik of Torah, which is really the whole tachlis, as Rosh Hashiva's father Zatzal said, that every single person should reach whatever they can reach, ad sheyado magas, to have a tfisa in whatever you can in Torah and Masan Tovim. We should be zoicha that from learning from this divrei hesped, it should be a schus for us to become better, to reach this madrega, and eventually, Mitzvah Hashem, we should see Bilah Hamavis Lanatzach U'mocha Hashem Elokim dimo mi'al kol panim.
Reb Yehoshua Lampel.
Shus, the Hohen Holla. Begin with the Avart, Shlem Fashal's cousin told me Shem Zayd in this week's Parsha. It says, Yaakov Ishtam Yoshev Ahalim. Yaakov was Yoshev Ahalim, but the Yoshev, it says Chaser Vav. So why is it Chaser Vav? So Zayd is a kind of Racha said that you find by light and by Ephraim, same Inyan, that it was a new yeshiva. It was the first time the yeshiva. So he said that by Yaakov, Pshat is Kol Yoim Yu Beinecha Kachadoshim. So it was every day. So it was Yoshev, but it was really Yoshav because it was every day. When a new thing. When I used to ask the Shailas, every time he answered me like he never heard the Shaila before, but said it over. And said the Lamdas sometimes, discuss a little later. Iker, one of the things we saw, the insider, I was coming from an outsider and came an insider, so a little bit to appreciate different things you see on the inside. Whenever we walked into the house to visit, we knew he was in the study, he was learning. So we went over, we said hello with the children, he would hold them, hug them, kiss them, talk a little bit, but then it was back to learning. To see usually he had his notebook, and he was writing his notebook with his pen, he wrote. And one time I was observing just him learning, and he learned down the first, Matzah Shabbos, it was the first, some Pesachim, he learned down first the Gemara, all the way down, and then the Rashi, all the way down, and the Taisus, all the way down. Then, at one point, there was a line that was bothering him, he said over the line a few times. On Purim, after many people would come, he was busy with at least 5 different tzedakahs. And everyone was muttering with brachas, and it was a ganze Purim. So when people were cleaning up for the meal, so you would think that it's a good time for a nap a little bit. But Zaidi was in the study, he was learning. When I first stayed in the house for Shabbos, the time it came, I was engaged then. So we came in late at night, around 1 o'clock. Lady was still by the table. There were some people there, still sitting by the Shabbos table. The next morning, around 6:30, Zaidi was learning. I had gotten up, I was there, so I was learning. No, come on. Learning. Even in the hospital in Maimonides, I was one night together with someone who was working on a sefer medical psukim. It was 11 o'clock, I was here, and I told him to start asking the shilos to bring his sefer. Went on till about 1 o'clock. When I was in Colombia a few months ago, for Shabbos afternoon, I asked him about 2 o'clock if he wanted to do Shnai Mikra. He said that he would fall asleep if he does it. So we said, maybe that's good, he'd fall asleep. But no, after my Shvel left, and I asked once again, could I bring the Chumash? He said no. And then he started speaking and learning. We spoke and learning for many hours. knew if he didn't want to fall asleep, he wanted to learn. So Mela, he did what he could, whatever he could in learning. L'maisa, even with all the asma that he was once telling me on a walk, he was telling me in the Gemara that you see the Amara chazed over 40 times. So you see how big masmidim they were. That's what he took out of that Gemara. Many times I was able to ask for the lamdis behind a particular psak, because I guess that's what got us einikel. So it's always a concise knetch in the whole sugya. Marshall, there was a shaila about credit union, so we spoke a few different times about it, different stadim. Agav, he told me once that some Rabbanim were calling up saying this side heter, that side heter. He said if you're already given to these heterim, if you're going to come, then you lost the whole thing. Lost the, he used the lashon in the ball game, that's what he said. Lost the ball game already. So, but in one of the lamdis he told me, he said was the Ikar Isser in Ribbis is giving more money because of Ribbis. That's meaning it's not only necessarily the giving every time if you have a payment, but if you end up giving more money, that itself is the Ikar Isser. So it makes an afkamina in some things. Sometimes I even went to the shiurim in MTJ in different tekufis when I was over there for different reasons. There were two shiurim. One was the regulars, Gemara Rashi Taisus and Bein. One was the black shir. So I used to hack up, and he would always answer the pachi, the knetch, of art, and sometimes he threw out a shaila. Usually he explained Gemara Rashi Taisus clear and pashut. If you knew the sugya, then you realized what he was saying. So other shir was pshat with Rashi, but klar pshat. And if you had a kasha, answer. Come to Yediyas HaTorah, only a few times I got it to, when I asked the shaila, I got it to good shaila. Then he would say, Pi Gemara, Pi Svara. One time I brought in my daughter, the shaila, what's considered Makom Chusa, how old is considered, that you have to wash your hands or Makom Chusa. So he said, on that occasion was a good shaila, and he said, maybe till at least till they're eating dagan, if you find by a bris milah that you don't stop the bracha, even if the tinik has struck him. Once told me that saying the pshat and the simonim at the end of the parsha was much easier. Now people expect a gematria. He has to think of gematrias, look through, and he tells people that he doesn't even look anywhere else. He just makes it himself. That way, if they find it somewhere else, it's not a problem. So all the simanim of Tanakh, so that he knew easily. Once he told me when I said a svara, said such a svara you can't say by yourself. Find an igris somewhere that says it, okay. So I found something similar in igris, but not as far as I wanted to say. But so he knew it was similar, but he didn't want to say that right. One of the things that was more good with him was that people asked him who to paskin like, the Mishnah Berurah, the Aruch HaShulchan. He tells them that they're really not much machlokes, and the Mishnah Berurah was written for a yachid to chap all the shittas, and the Aruch HaShulchan was written for more the rabbin, my nam. But he knew the mahalach of both of them. He knew the ganze Mishnah Berurah and ganze Aruch HaShulchan, the mahalach of each one. Once asked if learn a sugya through all the shoinim, so what should be chazer? He told me to chazer Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos. If you want to be a dayan, then you can learn Choshen Mishpat. Over, it was the Iker. Always had Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos. And the Rishonim, then it's Al Psak, Halacha, what comes out. Brachos, Chashivas HaTorah, see by the bris we made and say 3 years ago, many people kept on coming for brachos. And the bracha for all the boys would, you should be a big Talmud Chacham. I asked him if it's too many people. He said, no, I'm used to it already. My father said in his old age, they made me a Rebbe. And I say in my young age, they already made me a Rebbe. What's this? Hospital in Maimonides, one day he was sitting and I was asking Shilas, I see there was, every few seconds there was a little pain. He had some pain. He was sitting and he had a little pain in his face. But when he answered the Shilas, you could see the talking and learning, the voice got stronger, could see the simcha. Maise, he had expectations of what you should do. Remember when we first met, and before I was a cousin, he told me now you're young and you have sipuk with your chaverim, you're learning b'chavrusa, but as time goes on, the chaverim leave and may have to go out and it's going to become time to be marvelous to Torah. That's what he expected. He always, of course, addressed for all the questions. That's where we went. Ate anything. Gave time for everything. Was looking at a sefer. He once said, he told me, he wants Svarim Shem sich nicht. Should ask. So I did. He got it from me. Sometimes he gave me one of his own Svarim. He said he would get another one. And look out for people. Myself, a few maisim once when I first went there for Shabbos, there was I was up in the morning, as I said, had some shilas, and I was sitting at the table learning, and he asked me if I wanted something to drink, a coffee, something. And I guess I didn't say no strong enough, but before I knew it, he told me, you want sugar, you want sweetener, what do you want? And then the next minute he said, the coffee's on the table, it's there with everything, go and take it. So he knew that I'm not going to ask for a coffee anyways. This is the only way to have me get a coffee. So that's what he did. He once asked me, he said, where's the spring in your step? One time I wasn't looking so well. So where's the spring in your step? He said. And then I started to say something. He gave me brachas. No, it goes on stark. And a couple of years in Sukkot, a few years ago, he was very simple. He wanted to show me that he got in my father's sefer, that it came out a new edition. He was showing me. Came to Paskening. I once asked him about the fish. It was up in Campston Island. I said, "Maisu, what's with the fish and the worms?" And he told me, I don't eat it. He said, Belsky tined it. It's good, but I tined it that we don't have a Messiah on it, and it was only the lake fish that we have a Messiah. And he told me that he was once eating whitefish with his father, and they took out a worm. They said, this worm is that worm would have been kosher. But he said that Dogum lost money on it, but Maisi, he felt that this was right. So Haterim, he told me one time, out of necessity, that's how Haterim come. We don't just because Yana gave a heter, we don't try to be saimach on them. another Maisa with the Messiah. This Maisa with the Mara on Pesach by the Seder. I asked him what the Maisa, he has the horseradish for the Mara. So why does he have that? Why doesn't he have the lettuce? So he said because this have the Messiah on. The other lettuce, probably it's good, but maybe it's something else. It could be it's asparagus, it could be this. And he proceeded to tell me the Maisa with his father about somebody who came to discuss about different wheats, and he had a different view on what was chametz and what can't become chametz, and Rashid Tzal said that even if you're right and we're wrong, yes, we're following the Messiah, so we're right. That's and just want to end off. And he used to tell me about the Tzizavod and Tzidkus and Avodah. One Maisa with Tzidkus was that he told me himself that his minhag was to give 10% Meiser, about Meiser and Baruch Hashem. He said he doesn't think he ever missed to give Meiser. But on extra things that he used to get, maybe a Sira Kedushin or Levi in those days, he would give 20%. He said, Vayiyayom, one day he forgot to give the 20%. He said, and he fell and he ripped his pants. And the amount of money was exactly the extra 10%. That was where he lived. He tied you up that was the Indian that he was supposed to get. Avodah, just notice as the time went on, Rosh Hashanah, the Shemoneh Esrei used to get longer, the later years. That was all part of it. And rather than just give enough, really say enough, that's what we have. Yehi Zichrei Baruch.
Reb Moshe Feinstein.
Shus Shiva Chashvan Ho. Wherever Rabbi said, it's a tremendous chus to say the Hespedim, Hespedim, this Chashiv Yeshiva, I was able to learn him. Like Reb Moskowitz said, Hespedim always said that the Iker of Hesped is you should say Mises that people can learn from, not Stam, Chaycha, Sipurim, Tzadikim. And try to follow that derech. Shmestar Shlit Medrash, Vaynasa Adam Tzalmenu, Kid Museinu. Het steht der Kadosh Baruch Hu asked Malachi Ashoris Nasa Adam Tzalmenu V'Seshui Mik Adam. He asked them b'derech Shailo. So Malachim asked to say back to the Rebbeinu Shalom, Adam Zamativa, who is this Adam? What's he about? What are we talking about? So steht Kadosh Baruch Hu said Tzadikim Yotzim Mimenu, and he showed them the Tzadikim. And the Rishon HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't show them. Brings a pasuk. Die Hashem derech Tzadikim, derech Shem Tevei. Kadosh Baruch Hu showed them the Tzadikim. And Shtei Medrash, the Ilu HaKadosh Baruch Hu Rishon the Rishon, Midas Hadin would not have been manichim for Adam to be Nivra. So it's a Medrash Pliyah. If Rishon's asking them, so he's not tricking them, saying Avada, we know that the Rishon also came from Adam. From Reuven Moshe Feinstein, the Pshat, he said, Pshat is, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was talking about Nas Adam, Tzalmenu K'Museinu, he was talking about who's the Adam of the Stakab Reisa Bar Yalmo, the Adam that would be Nivra from Torah. And that Adam is a tzaddik. That's the Adam that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was talking about. He was saying the Piyut by Bar Yechoy, Nas Adam Nemar B'Vurecho. On the tzaddik who was gesagt, the Nas Adam. That's the Adam HaKadosh Baruch Hu had in mind when he was Nivra Adam. And the Rosh is a kilkul of the Adam, but it's not the Adam HaKadosh Baruch Hu was buried. So I think it's mamish. I think about this. It's mamish how we've been with Tzad. It's mamish brings to mind Mazedi. It was mamish his home, you looked at him, and you mamish saw the Adam that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was the Nas Adam Nema B'Varach. You mamish saw the Shleimus Adam in every Indian. You saw the Adam that HaKadosh Baruch Hu meant to be, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was buried with the Staka Braisa Bari Almo. Complete Shleimus. First thing that they have to think about is that Asmod and Torah was mamish bailit. It was unbelievable. Yeshua mentioned, ever you came into the house, you know, where Zaidi is going to be in the study learning. It was Pasha. You walked in, that's where you went. Kamat, never saw him, besides for the Sudas, but I'm saying, Kamat in the house, never saw him do anything about learning. Always learning. And you go to the back, you want to say hello, you want to say good vach, and you would sit there, and Kamat never noticed right away. He was always sitting and learning, writing his notes. And when I saw, we didn't mind. It was the most geschmacka thing to sit there waiting, watching Zaidi learn was mamash and machaya, because sat there for hours. Said each line of the Gemara so geschmack, such an imus, the line by line, each word out loud. The Rashis stopped, he thought, he wrote down a vart, still didn't notice you. It was mamash and machaya. I'm always snapped some pictures while he was learning. Who would have noticed? He was just sitting and learning. So sometimes you noticed, sometimes you gave up. After 10 minutes, you'd walk away. Then my brother asked, did you say hello? He said, no. She said, okay, I'll get his attention. She would come in and get his attention. But it was mamash, it was unbelievable to see. It was such an avas ateri, just mamash, he couldn't take his eyes off it. Another line, another Harav. I was once sitting there watching him learn. And I hear him learning Shmak for a little while. And then in the middle I hear Hajjan Lachsachs Menachas, Hajjan Chalan. I hear him going through the Hajjan and Besachs Menachas. Reads down the Yerotz and the Tefillah. Closed the Gemara, pulled the next Gemara on his desk, and went weiter. So a little while later, he stopped for a minute. I said, "Oh, Mazel Tov, Zaidi." He looks at me like, "What am I talking about?" I said, "I heard Zaidi finishing Menachos." He laughed. He's like, "Oh, thank you." And that was it. I guess it wasn't such an unusual occurrence. Saying that Menachos is not a small Masech, not easy Masech. It didn't seem to. I remember once, many years ago, maybe 6-7 years ago, I went to visit my Zayd, was in the hospital. So I walked in, and Mama, she's sitting there, learning, writing notes. Really thought it's a middle, he's sitting in yeshiva for a Seder. Didn't even notice me come in, he's sitting, learning, writing. So I asked my mother, I asked my grandmother, how's Zayd doing? She said, Baruch Hashem, he's pretty good, but he's a little bit having a hard time. He's in the hospital, everyone wants to do Mavakar Chayla. He's getting a lot of visitors to Mavakar Chayla, and it's taking away a lot of time from his learning. And it's very hard for him. He's losing a lot of time from his learning. That was what was hurting him in the hospital. That was his shtar. That too many people in Mavakar Chayla, what's going to be with his learning? I once heard from Reb Michel's son, Reb Feinstein, son of David, told me he has a michtav that the Yeshiva Zatzal wrote to Reb Michel when he was having different procedures. He said he was having his pacemaker then. He wrote to come out the same thing, that it's very schwer by him, all these procedures, it's being mafriya, his learning, it's taking away a lot of time. That was the tzara. When that's what your avos, when you have such avos atayra, that's the biggest tzara, that's taking away time from your learning. Heard even in the end, like a week before the tir, he was very, very shvach. My cousin told me, he asked him if he could read the Gemara out loud so that didn't have kaiches to read the Gemara. He asked him to read the Gemara for him. Mamash, the avos atayra was unstoppable. And from that asmada, it was versteh how he was zeichet v'akol atayra kula, the klarkai, mamash in every Indian. Kidua, I'm saying, for Rabbanim, he was the Dovra Kosher Yevi Alai. I'm saying, for so many Rabbanim, said every single shayla they didn't have the answer to, they turned to him from all over America, all the shaylas. And he always had the answer. The Mishpach always knew we could ask him anything, and learning, any mikseh and halacha, anything, and he always have an answer. I remember hearing a cute story my cousin told me when he was a kid. He was learning this week's parasha. Parashas told us that Shtei Rivka was the Shtei Rivka Avi she was the Av of Yaakov Esav. So Rashi says Loshne, he doesn't know Mazlam Mandenu. What pshat the pasuk's coming to tell us that she was the father of Yaakov Esav. It's pasuk. So he said he was a little kid. He figured he learned through Cheder. Rashi said he doesn't know. If Rashi doesn't know, Zaidi will zucher know. So he went to Zaidi and he asked him pshat. And sure enough, he told him a pshat. It was like, it was pasha. Anything, you always have the answer for it. And it wasn't just in Torah, it was the Shtei Mission, Enamena, Eitzav, Shia. It was mamish, any Indian, any time you needed an Eitzav, any Svikas you had, the clarkite of his Torah, of his Emunah, was mamish, it lit up the cheshach of the Suffolk was mamish, it disappeared, it was so clear. I recently had a shiloh, my wife had a shiloh to get a job. We called him up. It was mamish a half an hour of giving over the divrei emunah betachin about mazenis of shalom ksuvim loy with the ganze klarkai. And then he was patient for us what to do. It was mamish so full of emunah. Zanova Avad is a legendary. Zanova is legendary. Mamish. He was meruim mekalam and he acted mamish like a pasha the yid. He wouldn't ask anyone about triach anyone for anything. He tried to do everything himself. I would see the kitchen doing that. I would ask, I could help. Why should you help me? It's good. And you do, they say about many big anovim that he knew who he was. He understood it. There's a maisa. He was my shvager's friend. At a maisa, he had a shiloh. He went to some rabbonim, and they told him a psak. Then he went to my zaydi, asked him. He told him the opposite psak. So he told him, like, I don't know, what should I do? I'm just like, he wasn't sure what to do. He said, all these other rabbonim told me if I care. So he said, Zaydi smiled. He said, okay, well, who do you think they ask when they don't know the answer? He knew very well that the whole world is coming to him for their shilas, for their brachas. But it didn't make a ration. He just feared passion. And his chesed was mamish lahafli, how he had patience for people. I'm saying, you'd watch Amal, a guy asked him a shayla, and he obviously didn't like the answer, so he asked him again and again. Like everyone around him was like trying to get rid of him, but they just answered, pasha, just kept going patiently. I remember once my brother was telling me that once it was an Erev Pesach, and they were very, very behind still, getting ready for Pesach. And he said, my Zay was on the phone for who knows how long. Some lady called and she had a whole list. She was going through one by one all her cosmetics. If it's kosher Pesach, not kosher Pesach. And she was going crazy. It was Erev Pesach, going through lists of cosmetics that people have things to do. You know what I'm saying? It's like I said something like, when Zay like hang up. So I remember exactly the reaction I got was basically like, do you know your Zaydi? Like hang up on someone. It wasn't like oh I'll die to after you hang up on someone, even if she's drinking a cup. It wasn't sad. I remember once walking home after Suda, we met after davening in yeshiva, we met on the street. Person was obviously, not well, very disturbed person. He wasn't wearing a yarmulke, looked like mamish. I was like nervous to be walking with him, but apparently he was at one point in the yeshiva, and obviously he wasn't well anymore. Okay, so we left. Anyway, my sister ate the Suda by Zaydik. She came home, and she said, you wouldn't believe what happened in the middle of the Suda, there's a knock at the door. And she comes to the door, and there's this person there without a yarmulke, just like, who knows what I'm saying. She was also nervous. My grandpa saw him and said, there was a Shmarel, come in. Invited him in, went to his room to find him a yarmulke, brought him kiddush, served him a Suda. First, I wasn't like comfortable walking the street with him. Mamish fed him a whole Suda. He sat there after the Suda. Just one thing, one mice of the family always used to have my birthdays. It was always a very exciting day. If there was anyone in the family's birthdays, Bobby and Zayden would come over with a whole shopping cart full of presents, because it was a present, it wasn't just for the birthday boy. The present, every single family member got a present. I think Pashup Shad is you didn't want anyone else to be jealous. Why should people be jealous? So it was anyone's birthday, the whole family got a present, so no one should be jealous. That was, besides, they used to make stam, they used to make siyumim in honor of Einuch's birthday. He used to have on his calendar a whole list of birthdays. We always thought stam, you could know whose birthday it was, you could say happy birthday. It was only recently that we found out that he tried, I think that he seemed to have made siyumim for every birthday. I recently called him up on my birthday and he said, I just made a siyum for your birthday. I guess it's discussed. I think it's possible that all these tremendous milos are something that doesn't come b'teva. It's something that only shot how you could get to such milos. Like Mishnah Nova says, Kalaisi b'ter d'shma, Zeichad Dvarim Harbi, you go through the list, it's mamish, one by one, a Hespedim, a Zaydi, mamish. Each thing, the Eves Abrius, mamish, the Mabash, the Nova V'yiro, and then Meitz V'seshia, mamish, the whole list of Dvarim, there was mamish, you so clear, there was Mekuyim Beim. Zaydi always used to give me a bracha that his lashon was always that I should try to follow in the derech of my namesake. the yeshivas itself. That was always his bracha. He would say that to become him, he doesn't think it's possible. You probably don't have the brains that he had. He said you could go in his derech. That was always his nusach. So I think the same thing, I'm not saying we could become Ma'azedi, but I think to follow his derech, I think is something we could really try to emulate. Because I think you find by certain gedolim, their drachim were not shaykh, it's very hard to relate to. Ma'azedi's derech was a very, very normal derech. His whole derech achayim was very, very normal. He would kidua, he shop for Shabbos, he helped out in his house, he was going to chasanas and simchas, and he lived a very, very normal life. Everything, you wouldn't know b'chlal that everything he did was with such a normalka and such a pashtus. I think you saw from him that a person could, if he really uses his time and he really puts in all his kaiches, that even through a normal life, sort of a normal life, but more or less a normal derech hachayim, a person could steigais to tremendous madrigas. Just one more ma'isa, just one more ma'isa that showed the cheshivas that he had for everyone's Torah. I remember I was a young bacher, and I was in the house learning. My grandma wasn't home then, and he said, he got up, he said, we need to get the mail. So I jumped up, I said, okay, I'll go get the mail. He said, no, you're learning, keep learning. So I figured, I'll keep learning. When I'm done learning, I'll go get the mail. 30 seconds later, I hear the door open and close. Zaydu went himself to get the mail, because I was learning. So cheshivas for every person's Torah, every bacher, every young man, every his Torah is cheshivas for anyone's limud Torah. Just end up with one word that the mission of us in the Gemaras, and it's all one Mishnah, the list of Kalisi B'Torah Lishma. It appears in that same Mishnah in the Gemaras that the Baskals Yitza Ma'achayer V'Elam L'Brias M'Bani Shal Torah. What's the Hemshich Kalisi B'Torah Lishma? Tzeichad V'Ram Harbi to Elam Brias M'Bani Shal Torah. I was thinking when you saw, the pshat is when you see how wide a person could be Zeichad with Kalisi B'Torah Lishma, you saw the Zayda came mamish to such a shleimus Adam. You saw him. It was a tefiyah. How could you not be learning Torah? How could you not become like that? But when you see how the godless that Torah could bring to a person, you see the tefiyah of Eilaham L'Brias M'Bani Shal Torah. Should be zeicha to try to be mamshich his derech. Should be schus for him. He should be a meilitz yesher. My grandma for home mishpacha, for the yeshiva, and for all the klai, so he's a Baruch.